1990, Hollywood's most dangerous man collapsed at a nursing home and couldn't speak when the ambulance arrived. The stroke stole his voice, paralyzed his right side, and left the strongest physical specimen in film history unable to move. For 4 years, he lived in silence before dying at 80. The circus acrobat, who flew 50 feet in the air. The fighter who held his business partner out a 15th floor window to win an argument. The revolutionary who broke the studio system. The activist Malcolm X, exposed for reading a censored speech at the March on Washington. The lover who destroyed his wife while keeping a mistress for 20 years. The target of an FBI file that tracked his politics and sexuality for 3 decades. Hit by cars 8 times as a kid in East Harlem. He learned violence was the only language that mattered. And he spoke it fluently until his body betrayed him. His name was Burt Lancaster, the man Hollywood couldn't destroy until his own flesh did the job. Today, we tell his story. Number 1, hit by cars 8 times and learning to fight in East Harlem streets. Burt and Stephen Lancaster arrived on November 2nd, 1913 at 209 East 106th Street in Manhattan's Irish section of East Harlem, a tough multi-ethnic neighborhood where survival meant learning violence early. James Lancaster worked as a postal worker with a rich tenor voice. Elizabeth Lancaster ruled the household as a strict disciplinarian who administered whippings when necessary. And young Burt spent most of his time on streets that didn't forgive weakness. Undersized until his teens, he was knocked down by automobiles no fewer than 8 times. Once, he broke his nose falling from a fire escape and quickly learned to use his fists before other kids could use theirs. He and his brothers shoveled snow, sold newspapers outside Macy's, and shined shoes to help the family survive during years when a postal worker's salary couldn't feed everyone. Elizabeth Lancaster died of a cerebral hemorrhage before Burt graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School, a traumatic loss that biographers believe shaped his complex emotional nature and his inability to show vulnerability for the rest of his life. The street kid secretly loved opera and wanted to become an opera singer, not an actor, spending hours reading books while his friends fought on corners. NYU offered him a basketball scholarship, proving the undersized kid had grown into an athlete. And he attended for 2 years before dropping out in 1932 to pursue something impossible for a 19-year-old with no money and no connections. Number 2, the $5 a week circus acrobat who learned to fly. 19 years old in 1932, when Lancaster dropped out of NYU and formed an acrobat duo called Lang and Crobat with Nick Crobat, a muscular, pint-sized friend from the Italian section of East Harlem he'd known since age 9. The two had met at Union Settlement House, where an Australian gymnast named Curly mesmerized them with horizontal bar tricks, planting. Dreams of flying through the air while the depression crushed everyone around them. 34 weeks rehearsing in a New York gym, barely eating, perfecting moves that would either make them professionals or kill them during the attempt. And they traveled to St. Petersburg, Florida, in a recalcitrant jalopy to join the Cape Brothers Circus. Their pay was $5 a week and board during the depths of the Depression, when men with college degrees were jumping from buildings and they performed horizontal bar and trapeze acts while touring vaudeville circuits across America. The WPA, Federal Theater Project Circus Unit, hired them from 1935 to 1938, government work that kept them alive during years when circuses were collapsing. Lancaster married June Ernst in 1935, daughter of a renowned female aerialist and an accomplished trapeze artist herself. In the end, the marriage lasted barely a year before ending in divorce, that some sources date to 1936, and others claim happened as late as 1946. In 1939, Lancaster sustained a hand injury that forced him to abandon circus work with what he called great regret, and some sources suggest he faced finger amputation if he continued performing. Lang and Cravat ended as a professional act, but Nick Cravat remained Lancaster's closest friend for life, appearing in 9 films together and staying on Lancaster's payroll until both men died within a month of each other in 1994. Between circus and military service, Lancaster worked as a salesman for Marshall Field's department store, a firefighter, a singing waiter, a lingerie salesman, and a worker in a Chicago meatpacking plant. No jobs that kept him alive until the war took him to Italy and brought him back with a future nobody saw coming. Number 3, the elevator encounter at age 32 that launched everything. Lancaster's Hollywood discovery remains one of the most improbable chance encounters in film history. The kind of story that sounds fabricated, except everyone involved confirmed it happened exactly this way. After serving in the Army's 21st Special Services Division from 1943 to 1945, entertaining troops in Italy under General Mark Clark's Fifth Army, Lancaster returned to New York and visited his girlfriend, Norma Anderson, at work in the RCA building. A small man named Jack Malur stared at Lancaster in the elevator, associate to producer Irving L. Jacobs, who'd been searching for a big-framed actor to play a tough-minded sergeant. When Malur asked if Lancaster was an actor, Lancaster replied he was a dumb actor, meaning he performed without words as an acrobat who'd never spoken a line on stage. Minutes later, Lancaster found himself invited to audition for the Broadway play A Sound of Hunting, and after just 3 weeks of rehearsals, he opened on November 6, 1945, at age 32, with zero acting training or experience beyond entertaining soldiers in Italy. The play flopped after only 3 weeks, but Lancaster's performance attracted 7 offers from major Hollywood. Studios and agent Harold Hecht made him an offer he couldn't refuse, the chance to become a producer within 5 years if he signed the right contract. January 8, 1946, marked Lancaster's signature with producer Hal Wallace on a non-exclusive contract, allowing him to make outside films, and The Killers, released later that year, made Lancaster an overnight sensation at 32. Critics called him a bronzed Apollo and a brute with the eyes of an angel, and one vintage magazine noted that the amazing thing about those first reviews was that most every one of them spoke of the ease of his first performance. The circus acrobat, who'd earned $5 a week now, commanded attention as Hollywood's newest star, and within 2 years, he'd start dismantling the studio system that created him. 4. The revolutionary producer who broke Hollywood's power structure. Lancaster didn't just want to be a star, he wanted to own his work in ways the studio system never allowed. Just 2 years into his film career, he and Harold Hecht formed a production company that evolved into Hecht Hill Lancaster by 1955. From 1954 to 1959, HHL ranked as the biggest independent production unit in Hollywood, and they proved independents could beat the studios at their own game. Here's how they did it. Marty in 1955 cost $250,000 to produce, earned $2 million, and won both the Best Picture Oscar and the Palme d'Or at Cannes, the little film that humiliated every major studio. Trapeze in 1956 became one of the 3 highest-grossing films that year. In 1954, HHL signed a $12 million distribution deal with United Artists for 7 films. And the money kept rolling in until it didn't. Sweet Smell of Success in 1957, now considered a masterpiece, lost over $1 million on release. The Unforgiven ballooned from $3 million to $5.5 million in budget overruns. By 1960, the company collapsed, forcing Lancaster to make 4 films at $150,000 per picture, 1/5 his normal fee, just to pay back United Artists. The revolutionary who broke the studio system discovered that independence meant betting everything, and when the bet failed, Hollywood made him pay. But losing money was nothing compared to what the FBI was writing down about him in secret files. 5. The FBI file that tracked his sex life and politics for 3 decades. January 1960. Police raided a millionaire's home and found a guest register with Lancaster's name alongside Rock Hudson at alleged orgies. J. Edgar Hoover personally labeled Lancaster a threat to U.S. security due to his sexual inclinations, and the surveillance that had started in 1948 now expanded into his bedroom. For almost 30 years, the FBI, LAPD, and Office of Naval Intelligence monitored Burt Lancaster's every move, building a file that wouldn't be revealed until 6 years after his death. What they were tracking, in 1947, Lancaster was one of 26 movie stars who flew to Washington to protest HUAC hearings, and his production company employed blacklisted writers when doing so. Could destroy careers. Hoover received letters demanding he investigate Lancaster's films for communist propaganda, one claiming The Crimson Pirate contained a speech about workers that sounded like a commie plug. In 1957, Lancaster requested to meet Hoover personally, and Hoover refused in view of his subversive associations, treating a Hollywood star like an enemy of the state. The investigation lasted 3 decades and found nothing. No Communist Party membership, no security threat, just a man who refused to stay silent during McCarthyism. In 2000, biographer Kate Buford obtained the FBI files through FOIA and revealed what the Bureau had documented about Lancaster's bisexuality and multiple gay relationships. While Buford concluded he had so many gay friends that he was never going to say, "I'm not gay," because that implied being gay was somehow lesser. The FBI spent 30 years trying to destroy a man whose real crime was refusing to be intimidated. And intimidation was something Burt Lancaster understood better than anyone. 6. The March on Washington speech that Malcolm X exposed as censored. Lancaster wasn't just a Hollywood liberal who signed petitions. He put his career on the line when most actors stayed silent. The 1963 March on Washington brought Lancaster flying from Paris, where he was filming The Train, to join the march on August 28, 1963. And he became one of the few actors given the honor of speaking at the Lincoln Memorial, presenting a petition signed by 1,500 Americans supporting the civil rights movement. According to Malcolm X, in a late 1963 Detroit speech, Lancaster read the speech that James Baldwin was supposed to make because march organizers wouldn't let Baldwin get up there because they knew Baldwin was liable to say anything. The fiery author's words were deemed too radical for national television, so they had a white movie star deliver a sanitized version instead. And Malcolm X exposed the hypocrisy to black audiences who deserved to know the truth. Lancaster and his wife Norma hosted a fundraiser for Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC ahead of the march, and Norma remained a lifelong NAACP member when membership meant FBI surveillance. Lancaster turned down the lead role in Patton in 1970 due to anti-war sympathies, later saying he believed that war was a mistake and he helped pay for the defense of Private Billy Dean Smith, an African-American soldier accused of fragging 2 officers in Vietnam in 1971, giving $3,000 to defense attorneys to hire ballistics experts. Smith was acquitted. In 1973, Lancaster was named on President Richard Nixon's enemies list, one of 575 people targeted alongside Paul Newman, Gene Hackman, and Hugh Hefner. Proof that speaking truth to power meant making powerful enemies. In 1988, at age 74, he appeared in ACLU television ads declaring, "I'm a card-carrying member of the ACLU. No one agrees with every single thing they've done, but no one can disagree with the guiding principle. With liberty and justice for all." The man who grew up fighting in East Harlem streets spent his Hollywood fortune fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. But when it came to fighting directors and co-stars, he used a different weapon entirely. 7. The 15th Floor Window and Other Tales of Terror from Hollywood's Scariest Star. Lancaster's reputation for physical intimidation became legendary among directors, actors, and crew members who lived to tell the stories. Director Alexander McKendrick told the most famous incident when Lancaster argued with his business partner, Harold Hecht. He's a small, neurotic man, and when Hecht refused to give way, Lancaster picked him up by his lapels and held him out of the 15th floor office window. After a bit, Harold saw Burt's point of view, McKendrick recalled, with the dark humor of someone who'd witnessed genuine terror. Director Michael Winner, who made Lawman and Scorpio with Lancaster, reported that Lancaster tried to kill me 3 times and he was still my dearest friend. And Lancaster once dragged him up screaming profanity before allegedly holding Winner over the edge of a cliff during filming. Winner was told by a colleague that it was a very good sign because Burt only threatens to kill his friends, which suggests the people he didn't threaten were in real danger. Here's why this mattered. Arthur Penn lasted 1 day as director on The Train in 1964, before Lancaster fired him, wanting action instead of Penn's intimate art film. And Lancaster told screenwriter Walter Bernstein that Frankenheimer is a bit of a whore, but he'll do what I want. Alexander McKendrick was fired during The Devil's Disciple in 1959, and Fred Zinnemann, usually mild-mannered, finally snapped during From Here to Eternity and told Lancaster to go screw himself. But the irony was that Montgomery Clift intimidated Lancaster during From Here to Eternity so much that in their first scene together, you can see Lancaster shaking. And Lancaster later admitted Clift had so much power, so much concentration, that even the toughest man in Hollywood felt weak. The crew members said working with Lancaster felt like defusing a bomb. You never knew which personality would show up. Playwright Clifford Odets famously described Lancaster as having 7 distinct personalities: enigmatic Burt, coxcomb Burt, wildman Burt, old father Burt, Mr. Hyde with cutting, searing cruelty, Marquis de Lancaster as a mincing gentleman, and Snake Oil Burt as a con man and rogue. Composer Elmer Bernstein gave the clearest warning when he said, Burt was really scary. He was a dangerous guy. He had a short fuse, he was very physical, and you thought you might get punched out. The circus acrobat, who learned to fight at age 9 in East Harlem, never stopped using violence as his first language, but when the cameras rolled, he became something different entirely. Number 8. The beach scene, the Oscar win, and the villain nobody forgot. Lancaster's greatest performances arrived when he defied expectations and played against his tough guy image. In From Here to Eternity, in 1953, the famous romantic scene with Deborah Kerr in the surf became one of cinema's most iconic images, and it was Lancaster's idea to play the love scene horizontally in the waves when the script had them standing. Censor Joseph Breen removed 4 seconds and demanded Kerr wear a skirt over her bathing suit and the waves grating white foam over their bodies was considered scandalously erotic in 1953. The film won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Lancaster earned his first Oscar nomination, but he and co-star Montgomery Clift split the vote and allowed William Holden to win for Stalag 17. Elmer Gantry, in 1960, brought Lancaster the Academy Award for Best Actor, playing a charismatic charlatan evangelist and con man, and his acceptance speech lasted just 32 seconds. When Miss Garson handed me this, she very graciously said, "So well earned. Right now, I feel so happy that I want to thank all the members of the Academy who did not vote for me." Sweet smell of success. Only in 1957 gave Lancaster his portrayal of J.J. Hunsaker, a vicious, power-hungry gossip columnist based on Walter Winchell. In a man, director McKendrick used Vaseline on Lancaster's glasses to give him a perpetually blank gaze while manipulating his intimidating presence. The film lost over $1 million initially, but became a Criterion Collection masterpiece that film students still study. The Leopard in 1963 cast Lancaster as an Italian prince, and director Luchino Visconti initially rejected him, protesting, "Oh no, a cowboy!" Castor immersed himself by reading the novel multiple times and researching with author Lampedusa's widow, later calling it my best work, and Visconti the finest director I've ever worked with. During the climactic 45-minute ballroom scene that took 48 days to film, Lancaster masked severe knee pain during the waltz sequences, and the film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. 85 to 87 films over 45 years. 4 Oscar nominations with 1 win, D2 BAFTA wins, 1 Golden Globe, 1 Silver Bear, 1 Volpe Cup. And AFI ranked him number 19 of the greatest male stars of classic Hollywood. His star became the first placed on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, proof that even Hollywood's most dangerous man could be honored when his performances transcended his reputation. But off-screen, he was destroying the woman who loved him most. Number 9, the 20-year mistress, the alcoholic wife, and the pitcher broken over his head. Lancaster married Norma Anderson on December 28, 1946, in Yuma, Arizona, to avoid California's 3-day waiting period. And the studio announced she was a young war widow with a small son. Baby James had actually been born June 30th, 1946, before the marriage, and Lancaster had been trying to raise money for an abortion, but Norma's Catholic faith forbade it. They had 5 children together: James, Bill, Susan, Joanna, and Siegfried. The affair started immediately. Marlene Dietrich, while Norma was pregnant in New York, Shelley Winters for 2 years, ending only when Winters learned Norma was pregnant again. Joan Blondell, Yvonne DiCarlo, Deborah Kerr, and others filled the decades between. And then came Jackie Bone. In 1964, Lancaster met Jackie Bone, a hairdresser, while filming the Hallelujah Trail, and their relationship lasted 20 years into the mid-1980s. The relationship was stormy, and once, they argued in a restaurant and Bone broke a pitcher over his head, proving Lancaster had finally met someone as violent as himself. In 1973, Lancaster and Bone moved to Rome together, where he learned Italian and cooked spaghetti, while his wife back in America tried to find solace by excessively consuming alcohol. Here's what that meant for Norma. Lancaster and Norma separated January 4th, 1966, and divorce finalized June 27th, 1969, with community property valued at over $2 million divided between them. Lancaster was reportedly uncomfortable around her afterward, but always watched out for her, guilt being easier than actual presence. Norma died July 21st, 1988, at age 71, and the official causes were pneumonia and stroke, but her death certificate revealed alcoholic liver disease. And a friend said she was as hopeless an alcoholic as you could ever run into towards the end. Sunbill Lancaster became a screenwriter, penning The Bad News Bears in 1976, and the Walter Matthau character, a charismatic misanthrope, was reportedly based on his father, Burt, the man who held business partners out of windows, destroyed his wife slowly over 23 years of marriage, but his own body was about to deliver the cruelest punishment of all. 10. The cruelest irony. For a man who was the strongest physical specimen Hollywood ever saw. For a man whose career was built on physical prowess. The ending arrived with devastating appropriateness. At the age 41 to 43, Lancaster performed nearly all his own trapeze stunts in trapeze. And at age 50 to 51, he jumped on and off moving trains in the train. At age 52 to 54, in the swimmer, he appeared in only swim trunks for 95 minutes, despite being terrified of water and needing swimming lessons before filming. Director John Frankenheimer said, Burt Lancaster was the strongest man physically I've ever seen. He was one of the best stuntmen who ever lived, and nobody who worked with Lancaster ever disputed that assessment. In January 1980, Lancaster nearly died during routine gallbladder surgery, requiring 11 hours instead of the expected 5 and spending 2 days in intensive care. In 1983, at age 69, he suffered 2 minor heart attacks, followed by emergency quadruple bypass surgery lasting 7 hours at Cedars-Sinai, forcing him to turn down starring roles in Kiss of the Spider Woman and Maria's Lovers. 1990, Hollywood's most dangerous man collapsed at a nursing home and couldn't speak when the ambulance arrived. The stroke stole his voice, paralyzed his right side, and left the strongest physical specimen in film history unable to move. For 4 years, he lived in silence before dying at 80. The circus acrobat who flew 50 feet in the air. The fighter who held his business partner out of a 15th floor window to win an argument. The revolutionary who broke the studio system. The activist Malcolm X exposed for reading a censored speech at the March on Washington. The lover who destroyed his wife while keeping a mistress for 20 years. The target of an FBI file that practiced politics and sexuality for 3 decades. Hit by cars 8 times as a kid in East Harlem. He learned violence was the only language that mattered, and he spoke it fluently until his body betrayed him. His name was Burt Lancaster, the man Hollywood couldn't destroy until his own flesh did the job. Today, we tell his story. Number 1, hit by cars 8 times and learning to fight in East Harlem streets. Burt and Stephen Lancaster arrived on November 2nd, 1913 at 209 East 106th Street in Manhattan's Irish section of East Harlem, a tough, multi-ethnic neighborhood where survival meant learning violence early. James Lancaster worked as a postal worker with a rich tenor voice. Elizabeth Lancaster ruled the household as a strict disciplinarian who administered whippings when necessary. And young Burt spent most of his time on streets that didn't forgive weakness. Undersized, until his teens, he was knocked down by automobiles no fewer than 8 times. Once he broke his nose falling from a fire escape and quickly learned to use his fists before other kids could use theirs. He and his brothers shoveled snow, sold newspapers outside Macy's, and shined shoes to help the family survive during years when a postal worker's salary couldn't feed everyone. Elizabeth Lancaster died of a cerebral hemorrhage before Burt graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School, a traumatic loss that biographers believe shaped his complex emotional nature and his inability to show vulnerability for the rest of his life. The street kid secretly loved opera and wanted to become an opera singer, not an actor, spending hours reading books while his friends fought on corners. NYU offered him a basketball scholarship, proving the undersized kid had grown into an athlete, and he attended for 2 years before dropping out in 1932 to pursue something impossible for a 19-year-old with no money and no connections. 2. The $5 a week circus acrobat who learned to fly. 19 years old in 1932, when Lancaster dropped out of NYU and formed an acrobat duo called Lang and Cravat with Nick Cravat, a muscular, pint-sized friend from the Italian section of East Harlem he'd known since age 9. The two had met at Union Settlement House, where an Australian gymnast named Curly mesmerized them with horizontal bar tricks, planting dreams of flying through the air, while the depression crushed everyone around them. 34 weeks rehearsing in a New York gym, barely eating. Perfecting moves that would either make them professionals or kill them during the attempt. And they traveled to St. Petersburg, Florida, in a recalcitrant jalopy to join the K Brothers Circus. Their pay was $5 a week and board during the depths of the Depression, when men with college degrees were jumping from buildings.